You may not recognize us in these masks. These are not for our current pandemic, but for this episode, we go back 102 years.
When Louisiana was part of another pandemic at the end of World War I.
What?
What? Let's take these masks off.
Okay. The time was 1918, and Louisiana was in the middle of another pandemic that infected more than 350,000 people in the state.
Silent film star Theda Bara wanted to make a film set in the war in Paris and with the Red Cross, but that was impossible at that time. So instead, she took her crew down here to New Orleans.
It was mainly because New Orleans was the only city that had French quarters that looked like Paris.
And even though bars, restaurants, and major facilities were closed due to the pandemic, Bara had enough clout to make her movie here anyway.
For this episode, we flash back to 1918 for the film The Light. In the fall of 1918, just weeks before the ending of World War I, silent film star Theda Bara came to New Orleans to film scenes for her photoplay, The Light. Bara was one of the most popular actresses and sex symbols of the time. Playing primarily the role of a femme fatale, Bara became known as the Vamp. In the film, Bara starred as a notorious Parisian vamp known as the wickedest woman in Paris. After tiring of this lifestyle, she decides to become a Red Cross nurse and serve France during World War I. Her past, however, barred this from happening as she was rejected each time she applied. She ultimately redeemed herself by nursing a blinded soldier who once was a famous artist who sought her for his model. The film also starred Eugene Ormond, Robert Walker, George Renovant, and Florence Martin. It was directed by J. Gordon Edwards. International location shooting at the time was rare. The studio had previously planned to build a Parisian set in New York City, but abandoned that plan because of the wartime shortage of carpenters. Instead, the production company came to New Orleans because it was more like Paris than any other American city. At the time the film crew arrived, a global pandemic, which had originated in Europe during the war, had made its way into Louisiana. On October the 9th, 1918, authorities ordered the closure of all schools and businesses, banned public gatherings, and isolated and quarantined those affected. Face masks were a requirement. This, however, did not stop the production. Bara proved to be a stickler for detail. Walter Parker, the general manager of the Association of Commerce, was tasked with making all the location arrangements necessary to stage her picture. Bara's first demand was for a facility to represent a French hospital. The U.S. Shipping Board building in the French Quarter became the perfect French hospital with the addition of French and Red Cross flags. Next, the film needed a Red Cross ambulance, but all of them were in use. When a modified police car was suggested, Bara insisted that would be grotesque, even to the untrained eye of a movie fan. Fortunately, the Red Cross was finally able to provide one for filming. Bara's next request was for a Victoria, a four-wheel pleasure carriage designed for two passengers with a raised seat in front for a driver. Parker located an undertaker who rented Victorias. He then had to locate horses to draw the carriage, which he found at a local brewery. During her stay in New Orleans, Bara and her sister Lori visited the convalescing soldiers from Jackson Barracks who were hospitalized at the Southern Yacht Club. There she went among 30 soldiers, speaking words of cheer and comfort, passing out cigarettes, and autographing photos with no thought of her personal danger. She turned down the flu mask and shook hands with all the men. She sat on the edges of the cots of those men who were too weak to rise. Unfortunately, during the visit, Lori, her sister, contracted the flu. Her sister's illness would cause Bara to miss one of the film's most pivotal scenes. Set against the backdrop of the old French opera house, the film called for Bara to be shown driving a speeding car through the streets of Paris during an air raid by the Germans. A French officer was in the back seat operating an anti-aircraft gun, shooting down Zeppelins from the air. When time came to shoot the scene, Bara refused to leave her apartment at the St. Charles, fearing her sister might grow worse during her absence. When Bara informed her director that she would be unable to work, she suggested Yvonne Ross, a member of the local Red Cross Emergency Corps, be used in the scene in her place. Laurie recovered shortly thereafter. The Light was released on January the 12th, 1919 to much fanfare. The studio offered a wide variety of advertising aids to support the campaign. Sadly, like most other silent films, very little is still available and is considered a lost film.